When you're interested in being right, you're not interested in the relationship. You're just interested in winning the point. And in a relationship, clearly there's two people, and if one wins, that means the other loses. So if one person in the relationship loses, you both lose.
This is episode number 626 with Lisa Brateman. She is a returning guest, and she is going to be talking about how to transform conflicts into conversation. I love talking about this topic. It's one of my specialties, talking about conflict, talking about communication skills, talking about conflict resolution skills. This is such an essential part of what makes us succeed in relationships. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you, I have written two books. The first one is Becoming a Woman of Value, How to Thrive in Life and Love. And this book is for anyone who has ever felt that they're just in survival mode. We have 30 exercises and tips and tools to help you thrive in life and in your love life. And the second book is called Choice Points in Dating. And this book is for anyone who is dating and would like some guidance on how to think about dating, how to create your must-have and deal breaker lists, how to go on your last first date, how to do online dating, how to know when to stay and go. It's really a guidebook based on the principles that I teach my clients. Both books are available on Amazon for Kindle or paperback, and Choice Points is also available as an audiobook. This week's tip on becoming a woman of value is step number 4, love your body. How many of us actually love our bodies, no matter how thin or heavy or whatever we are? Everybody finds fault. Pretty much everyone finds fault in their bodies. And it's a shame because this is the one body we have. It is a treasure to have a body that functions. And we just spend so much time in self-loathing. So my challenge to you this week is to find one part of your body that you tend to love the least and give it some love. Sometimes it's helpful to put some glitter on it, to do some massaging on it, put a rub-on tattoo on it, one of those, temporary tattoos. Just do something to give it a little love, be a little lighter about it, and love on it a little bit more, because it is such an important thing to do. Before I bring on my guest, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. If you are not yet a member, I run a large Facebook group that is called Your Last First Date. It's for women over 40 who would like some actual guidance on dating. This is a free group. It is run by me and 7 amazing monitors, and most of the groups out there do not have any monitoring at all. And it's just a place for people to complain. And that's not the focus of my group at all. So if you want real guidance and you want to actually learn on your journey to lasting love, join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guest, Lisa Brateman. She is a returning guest. She is a psychotherapist, a relationship specialist, public speaker, media commentator with more than 20 years of experience. She offers individual, couples, and group therapy in New York City, and her areas of expertise are anxiety and depression, couples therapy, marital and premarital, and conflict resolution. She is the author of the new book, What Are We Really Fighting About? How to Transform Conflicts into Conversations. And the second book she wrote also this year is The Courage to Walk Away, Move On After Infidelity by Mourning What You Lost, Identifying Your Relationship Needs, and Empowering Yourself for the Future. She's here today to talk about how to transform conflicts into conversations. So, Lisa, it is so nice to have you back on the podcast in such a short period of time. You have written 2 amazing books, and this book, I love the topic. I love talking about conflict resolution. I love talking about communication skills because we are so bad at both of those things. And so welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again, and so soon.
Yes. So let's talk about fighting. People are really afraid of conflict, and you talk about successful fights. Can you define what that might look like?
Yes, well, successful fights happen when you're first and foremost willing to have a conversation or even willing to bring something up. So many people are conflict avoidant because they know the history. One person says this, the other person says this, back and forth, and then it kind of goes in a pattern. So having a good fight, it's not a problem that couples fight. And what are we really fighting about is how to turn, conflict into conversations. The problem is not that you're fighting, it's how you fight.
Mhm.
And how you fight, if you start off angry and yelling and the other person automatically gets defensive, we all know where that goes. So this is about changing it up, doing something differently, understanding what your triggers are, understanding what you bring to the table to make that fight turn into the one where you don't talk for a week or it's just tension. There's a lot of tension and uncomfortable. So how you fight is the key to it, not that you fight. Because the couples who say, oh, we never fight, that doesn't mean they have a great relationship either. So I think there's a myth of if we don't fight, that means everything's perfect, which is untrue as well.
Yeah, people are so conflict averse and they think it's a badge of honor to say we never fight. And I always am concerned when people say that because I feel like they are not having authentic conversations. If they never disagree on anything, it doesn't mean you're fist fighting. It doesn't mean that you're yelling. It means that you have disagreements and you know how to do it with kindness and with grace. And I'm imagining that the intention is to repair the relationship, not to have a right or wrong conversation. So let's go there about the right or wrong and winning
Yeah.
part.
Well, that's the key to so much. And I'm glad you brought that up. Because when you're interested in being right, you're not interested in the relationship. You're just interested in winning the point. And in a relationship, clearly there's two people, and if one wins, that means the other loses. So if one person in the relationship loses, you both lose. And you could have been technically right, but you walk away a loser just the same because nothing is cleared up, nothing is understood. It doesn't feel better. It's just kind of put to the side for the time being and festers and resentment builds. And the next fight most likely will come sooner because the first one wasn't resolved.
And people don't feel heard. There's so much unresolved. I mean, this is why things get carried along and
Yes.
we have all these triggers. You mentioned triggers earlier that come from this unresolved stuff, whether it's from our childhood or past relationships or the relationship we're in, all of a sudden we're there again because it's never been fully processed. So how do we approach arguments in a way that's better?
I think the first thing in starting it is understanding yourself better. What are your triggers? If you come from a family where you felt like your needs weren't met or you weren't heard, we bring that forward. And even if we are heard, we still feel sometimes that we're not, and we get angry or we pick a fight or we try to repair what happened in our early family of origin with our current partner, which happens all the time also. So it's really a matter of understanding yourself. What are your triggers when you talk about certain subjects? And I don't want to say somebody's overly sensitive because a lot of kids grow up and say, my parents always said I was overly sensitive. And that is code for you're too much. You care too much. You think too much. It's not about you. Get over it. So if your partner, now your spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, say you're too sensitive, that is a childhood trigger that will just rear its ugly head and bring into the present as opposed to the past where it belonged. Because maybe your partner currently now sometimes does think you're too sensitive, but not all the time. Maybe they think you overreact sometimes, but most of the time they don't think you do, but you hear it as I'm too much. And when that starts, you already start with the buildup of, it's like a continuation of the feeling you had in childhood that you're having currently about a different day, a different time in your life, a different person, but you might as well be 15 years old at the moment, the way you respond to it.
Yeah, that too much thing is such a big trigger.
Yeah.
You're too sensitive. I remember my mom telling me that a couple of years ago, and I said to her, I am sensitive, and it's actually a superpower, you know. So I reframed it for her because she wasn't comfortable with my sensitivity. She's not comfortable being told that I'm uncomfortable with something she said, so it's my problem. And this is where those kinds of conflicts continue because, you know, immediately I'm triggered back to childhood and I don't want to go there anymore. And so these fights happen between partners, but they also happen between siblings, between children and parents, you know, all of the people that we're in relationship with, especially intimate relationships with, we have the most arguments with, I would say, right?
Right. That's why in What Are We Really Fighting About, I talk about not just married couples or partners or romantic partners. I talk about mother-daughter relationships, mother-father relationships, sometimes on occasion sibling relationships, because those don't even have to be disguised of what are we talking about. We're still fighting about what happened in sixth grade when you told on me and got me in trouble. And like that comes right up, whether or not you remember that incident. The memory of the feeling of being thrown under the bus can come up in a fight today about something else. So when I say understanding yourself better, what is going on? That's why I titled the book, What Are We Really Fighting About? Because we think we're fighting about what's happening in the moment, but very often we're not. So
Very true.
it's really important to distinguish the two. And in the moment, it's really hard to distinguish that, oh, that's what my mother used to say to me when you're talking to your husband, because different day, different relationship. But if you don't know that you're triggered by you're so sensitive, which, as you gave a great example with your mom, you being sensitive means it's your fault. I did nothing wrong by saying, God, a multitude of things a mother would say to their daughter. There's nothing wrong with me saying you should change your shirt. You're too sensitive. I'm just trying to help. But there are better ways of saying, I also like that other shirt you have in your closet. You maybe try that. Let's see what that looks like too, as opposed to blaming you. Because it's about the shirt. It's about how we speak to each other. It's how we respect each other. And
Right.
not the blame game, the guilt, and this is classic with parents, the guilt part that comes into it. You're wrong. Why aren't you calling me back? Why are you doing this to me? As opposed to, I don't call my mother that often because I feel criticized when I do. Instead of saying that, you make up reasons and excuses, and you're not talking about what's really going on, because you don't want to talk about what's really going on, because that's the hard part. You rather it just go away, and wishful thinking. Maybe if I don't say anything, it will go away. Maybe she'll change on her own without me pointing out why she makes me angry.
Yeah, I just spoke to a client who has been dating somebody for about a year, and she's the type who goes along to get along, the people pleaser. And then all of a sudden, bam, like all these issues that she didn't really assert herself all along. Now it's really bothering her. So, what would you say to somebody who tends to suppress needs or not think it's important enough to bring up and then they implode?
I think it's important to take them through the paces of when they implode. That's usually a buildup of a lot of things, and it could be a short period of time, or it could be years. But when they implode, then they regret what they say, because then they're saying everything. It feels true in the moment, but it's unfair. Because people don't realize it's easier to say in the moment, what you just said made me feel uncomfortable, or what did you mean by that? Because I'm having I'm not sure I like what you said, or I'm not sure I understood what you said. Can you explain it to me? It's so much easier in the moment to address it as opposed to collecting it. When you collect it, you will implode. Because by the time you implode, you've had so much stuff coming at you that you've lost control of your language, of your vocabulary, of how you really feel. And then you say all these things that you don't, sometimes you mean, but often you don't mean. And then you're the one who's up, turns around that you're the one who is attacking. So you're attacking later as opposed to saying, hey, what did you mean by that? I'm not sure that sat well with me. So I think it's important to take your own emotional temperature. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, because even if it's a small thing where you feel slighted, not because you're too sensitive, but because it was a slight or you weren't thought of in a situation where you feel you should have been, to say it in the moment can clear it up in the moment. And you don't build up the resentment over time that then turns into something that's ugly. And you walk around for 6 months or a year or years sometimes building resentment, and then you can't talk to the person anymore because you don't even know where to start.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people don't even recognize that it is important to them in the moment. You know, something, for example, you're dating somebody new and they want to do the things they like to do. And another client was telling me that this guy always wanted to do the same thing. And it was boring. It felt like very little effort. And she said, I really like when people plan nice things to do, different things to do. And he still had the same date. And so she ended up ending the thing before it became anything. But for a lot of people, and I know for me in my marriage, I did try speaking up a lot in the beginning, but it never was met well. And so I just suppressed a whole bunch of stuff and then started to live my own life and a parallel life to my husband until I left him, because I didn't feel like we could ever really resolve conflicts because he would stonewall and walk away. So that happens too, where people really are not open to discussing. So there's so many ways to go now. And I think, so what happens if you are in partnership with somebody who isn't receptive, who's critical, who's defensive, who stonewalls, who does all the bad Gottman Four Horsemen things?
Well, that's why we should date people before we make a commitment for a period of
Yes.
time, or certainly live with them. And of course, before anything legal like marriage comes into place, people are so busy trying to meet the one that they ignore the things that are right in front of them, especially I think later in life. It goes both ways later in life. Later in life, the meeting somebody, it can be challenging, as you know better than anyone, on the different things, because that person was either married before, has 3 kids, or this or that. And so it's a lot more complicated, a lot more people in the room or in the relationship. But in order to really know those things, take the time. I mean, I don't believe you can really know somebody in an intimate relationship until you're with them at least a year. Because the first 6 months, everything is fabulous, and you're willing to do anything. You don't even think it's a compromise because you're so excited to be there. So I think our standards, I'm not a checklist because I don't believe in checklists per se, because you could checklist yourself out of relationships in a minute. But I think you need to ask yourself, when you see things like in your situation, if somebody's always stonewalling you, you have to ask yourself, do I want to have this experience for the next 30 years? Or is this time, this person is wonderful in a lot of ways, but my needs aren't being met, and knowing when to walk away. A lot of people don't want to be alone, so they put up with more things than they probably should.
Yeah, for
Especially
sure.
later, because you always hear there's more women out there than viable men. I mean, we all, we've all heard that. So I think sometimes women compromise too much in order to be a couple, because society still wants everyone to be coupled, whether it's best for the person or not.
I agree. And it worries me when I see people get into these types of relationships where the needs are not met, where, I mean, I spoke to somebody recently who said she's been in a long-term relationship, but they can't have hard conversations. And I'm very concerned, and I told her she's not working with me anymore, but I just said this are your needs being met? Like this is not a healthy relationship because you're avoiding all kinds of conversations that should happen. And a lot of people do have this fear that not only will they be alone, but that there aren't any other good people, like you said.
Mhm.
And I think it's better to be alone, honestly. And I think it's good to learn how to be alone, but also to learn how to be in conflict. And I encourage people to bring up conflicting issues early on, like money, like
Mm.
things that people are afraid to talk about. I
Money is a
mean,
big one.
I mean, even communication is a huge one, but that comes up right away because somebody's texting style, somebody's communication, are they consistent? Just before we even get to conflict, are they returning a text? Are they waiting a very long time and are they inconsistently communicating with you? And do you bring it up? And I advocate for people to bring it up right away, like just to try to understand the other person. And is this their communication style and does it work for you? And are they willing to do anything differently? And if not, then walk away. So, what would you say to somebody who's getting involved in a new relationship and their communication styles are very different?
One person could be, what's interesting is one person feels totally satisfied by their communication style because they're doing what they have always done, and the other one feels lacking. I think it's important to find out what it is that's lacking for them. I think in most relationships, nobody's one style is going to work for both. I think they both have to take a step towards each other. And no one person should do all the compromising or accepting. But I do feel that sometimes we have to accept, well, that's how they are about that. It depends what that is. If it's a deal breaker or something really, really important, no. But if it's something that you want, but that person's not capable of, you have to kind of evaluate the whole thing as a whole. Because not the thing about relationships are too is that not every relationship should fill all your needs either, because a lot of people think, well, I want this and this, and I said, well, you know what, sometimes a person's going to fill many of your needs, and are they the important ones in an intimate relationship? But you also have family and friends, and you need a community in your life, not just this one person, because it's a big burden for one person to feel they have to fill all your needs. Because I think that is doomed from the start when you only rely on that person. Well, you have to fulfill me sexually and emotionally, and you have to talk to me about all the things I want to talk about, whether they interest you or not. That's a setup for failure, also.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're looking for several people, not one person, and people's expectations are so high.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of disappointment. And again, this has so much to do with our family history, with, all of our relationship history. And people come in like with their arms crossed, like, I dare you to, to, you know, hurt me. And then inevitably you're going to be cheated on, you're going to be hurt again because you don't trust easily. So, we're bringing all of the baggage to every date, and every relationship. So yeah, I think I'm glad that you brought that up. So we began by talking about knowing yourself, and that's
Mhm.
one of the first step is to really know your triggers, know what you're bringing to the table. I'm imagining it's also important to know what your partner's bringing to the table.
Absolutely. Is the person you're dating, are they secretive? Are they withholding? Are they gregarious sometimes, and sometimes they're just shut down? That's why you need the time. And I'm not talking about seeing somebody once or twice a week for a year, but I'm talking about spending a lot of time with somebody. You want to know you want to know as much as you can, but not to say to judge the whole time, but to be in the moment with the person. Can they be spontaneous with you? Can they be in the moment with you? How did they see you? I think when we're younger, we look for partners who, are good looking or going to a good school or we think is a good family. All those criteria our parents taught us. But I think as we get older, we realize we find kindness sexy, where kindness really, really never played a role in what our moms or our parents told us to look for. And I think that the kindness and the consideration is what will get you through conflict in difficult times. And the fact that one of the things to look at is, are they interested in what you think, not just having an audience to say what, where's the reciprocity in just even in conversation? There are people who will never stop talking and think, wow, I had the best time, and the other person felt like an audience member and had the opposite experience. And that other person doesn't understand. We had this riveting conversation, except it wasn't a conversation.
Yeah.
It was a monologue. And I think I hear that so much, that a monologue, they'll ask one question, barely listen, and then say, oh, that happened to me too. It's like they kidnap the conversation. So these are things you want to look at. And these are things, you could say, when I brought up this, you automatically ran off with this story. I felt like you haven't heard me. How that person responds. I mean, we're not perfect and we all do that on occasion. But I think what's important is if you bring it to someone's attention gently and they deny it or they're defended or they're angry, that's a telltale sign.
I could not agree more. And I think a lot of people, in my experience, they sit there, especially women, will just sit there and listen and not ever interrupt or say how they feel. And they walk away with a lot of judgment about the person without ever telling them how they feel. So sometimes it is nervousness that a person just talks and talks. And when you tell them how you feel, they will actually respond in kind and apologize profusely and listen.
Hopefully.
Right. But then they're the ones who get angry at you. But that's good information because now you have more information than just what your assumptions are.
Right. And you get to see, early on, how do they respond when you tell them something that they're doing doesn't feel okay or they're not enjoying it? Do they defend themselves or they'll say, what was it about what I did that bothered you? They're interested in knowing, they're curious. And I think one of the most important fundamental cornerstones of any relationship, I don't care if you're together 3 months or 40 years, that you're still curious about what the person across the table thinks. Because what they thought of the same subject even 5 years earlier could very well be different now. And, when people say, oh, I know everything they think and feel, well, they've changed over time too, just as you have. So there's always something to learn, but you have to be interested and curious to know what it is, especially at different changes and phases of life that, as you get older, different things become important to you that weren't important before.
Curiosity is key. It's curiosity about each other and curiosity in general, like about life, about learning, about growing.
Sure.
There's so many people who are just stuck and static and just happy with the way they are. And one of my clients today was telling me about a guy she was talking to on a dating app, and she asked him if he had been to therapy. And he was like, I went to part of a session once with my ex-wife. So she's like, well, have you ever worked on anything else? And he goes, I don't have anything to work on. And she said, we're not a good match. It was just like, you have absolutely no insight into yourself and any self-awareness. It's like,
But I'm hearing.
can't think of anything. Yeah. So curiosity, willingness to grow, willingness to work together instead of me versus you. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts, like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last-first-date to learn more and claim this offer. Give us kind of a formula script for a healthy argument.
Just even for starters, if you want to talk about or bring something up that happened, hopefully something just recent, come to it with interest in clearing things up, not interest in criticizing them. How dare you say that to me? Or I do this every time this happens. Like when you come into it being open and wanting to know what's going on and wanting it to resolve itself, you're starting off at a point where something good can happen. If you were really upset, that's not the time to start a conversation of any kind, because historically it never works. If you need it, and I call it the adult timeout, but if you want to talk about something, but you're fuming, take 20 minutes, but let the person know. Or even in the middle of something and it's going badly, one of you has to say, you know what, I'm afraid I'm going to say things I'm going to regret. This just feels awful. Let's come back in an hour. But storming off without saying you're coming back in an hour is only going to make it worse. But if you say, I feel so overwhelmed, I need an hour, or I need to walk around the block, I need to calm down because I want this to turn out useful and helpful and productive. So even if you're in a bad way and it's starting to feel like the old way of going, you can break that or redirect it right in the middle to not continue the pattern. But it's harder to do that once you're in it because your adrenaline is up. You're thinking of all the things that you want that person to hear that they're no longer hearing. If you're having a conversation with somebody and you feel like you're not being heard, and even though you said it 3 times, like when people get angry, they keep on bringing up the same points over and over again, as if you didn't hear the first time. The other person heard, they just disregarded it. They didn't think it was important. They thought that's not the point. They thought a lot of different things. So when you're going into a conversation, to have the objective of, I want to learn something here. I want to hear what they're feeling. I'm going to acknowledge, even if I don't agree with them, even if they said, I did this and this was my intention. Even if I know they're wrong, I'm still going to acknowledge that, wow, you really feel strongly about this, or that's how you interpret what I said. And then they can start to listen. But before that happens, then it's just a race of who can say as many words in the shortest period of time and repeat each other constantly. If you say to me, I'm really upset, the other person needs to acknowledge that they're really upset, because then they feel hurt. And then when you feel hurt, all good stuff could happen after that. But if you don't feel hurt from the beginning, you're not going to feel any more heard at the end. Many years ago, there's one client, they were talking about something really mundane about the laundry or the dishwasher. No, it's the dishwasher. It comes up more than you would think. How to load the dishwasher. And so I looked at them after they both said their piece, and I said, what are you really fighting about? Are you really fighting about the dishwasher, about how to load it? And then, of course, it wasn't about the dishwasher, and we were able in this session to kind of touch on what it really was. It was about control and feeling disrespected. And so I've taught couples when they're by themselves, because therapy is only a short period of time, and the therapy happens when they're home and everywhere else. Sometimes couples will say to each other as it's happening is, okay, what are we really fighting about? What is really upsetting you right now? Because I know I ruined your favorite shirt in the laundry, and I'm sorry that I did that. I wasn't paying attention, but what are you really mad about? And that's when you can have an honest conversation, because you want to know what they're really angry about rather than fighting about the laundry or the dishwasher, because
Yeah.
that's about real feelings.
Yeah. Most people don't have the skills to dig underneath, right? It's, you
No,
know, therapy helps, coaching helps.
therapy helps, but staying in the moment, you don't have to have years of therapy to have a productive fight. You have to have the interest to know what the other person's feeling. A lot of therapy couldn't hurt. And I don't know anybody who wouldn't benefit in some way or another.
Right.
But the interest to know how your partner feels is the important part here. People will say, when you said this, and this is what you meant, and this is how you felt. And the other person will say, well, no, that's not how I felt. Yes, it is. Nobody can tell you how you felt but you.
Yeah.
So for starters, that one has to be, broken down, because they're really talking about what their interpretation is. It's like if you did something, when they tell you what your motive is, sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. And sometimes you don't want to own up to it. And I get that too. But when somebody tells you how they feel, that's a non-starter.
Oh, yeah. That would trigger the heck out of me. I'd be like, you
Most
don't know
people
how
it
I
would.
feel. Right.
Especially
Yeah,
when they didn't even ask you.
exactly. Yeah, you're making so many assumptions. And there are
Mhm.
stories. We make up stories about each other and then we interpret and we make meaning. And then it's a whole different thing than the other person probably meant. And we're not getting curious enough to find out what really was going on for them because we're so
And then,
sure.
yes, and then they start accusing, you're just like your mother.
Oh,
And,
yeah, that's
and then it's like, oh boy, you don't even know where to jump back in.
yeah, I got a lot of that when I was married. That was
You're
like
just like
such a
your
big,
mother. Mm.
yeah, you're just
And
like your
that's
mother.
never said in a good way. Why is that? Poor
No.
mothers.
Well, my husband also believed that I grew up with dysfunction, but he did not. So
Oh,
everything had to be my problem. I don't think he saw the dysfunction until the divorce. And now he can see how he grew up a little bit, that it was not the perfect family that he thought it was. But that's another issue is that if you walk into a relationship thinking you've got it all together and the other person's got all the problems, you're I was young. I had no idea what I was doing. Like today, I would
mm.
never choose somebody who would say those things to me, and I would take longer to explore the relationship and how they handled feedback and argued and all those things. But so many of us didn't even know that we were making bad choices because we didn't have the criteria to choose well.
Because what we grew up with was normal. And I hear this often, and I've certainly seen it in my own life, but I've certainly seen this with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients. Well, that's what we did growing up, meaning that was normal, that was right. And I think until people get like, even teenagers start realizing, oh, my best friend Sarah, they don't do that at their house. Like everybody gets a chance to talk at dinner, not just one person. Or in my friend's house, the mom works and there's more of a balance of you know, of who handles the food and the dishes, and everybody chips in. Where in my house, my mom was a stay-at-home mom and she seemed to do everything. And yes, my father worked and did this, but like until they're older and they're in other people's homes, what they grew up with was normal. And normal meaning that's just the way it is, not realizing there are so many different ways to do it. So unless, there was, it was horrific in the sense of some sort of abuse, how people communicated with each other, or who was allowed to talk, or what privileges were allowed, or the respect or the questions asked, that was normal. So that's what they bring forth as, well, they won't say, well, my family was perfect, but we did well. Everything, there was no problems, there was no major issues. So if there was no major issues, this was right. And I want to continue that with you, even though you're a different person and have a different experience.
And so many people just don't want to see, they don't see. I saw the dysfunction in my family early on, and I would seek out families that were healthier
Mm,
unconsciously even. I remember when I was in elementary school, we moved to a new town when I was in second grade, and my best friend had a really healthy home, very securely attached. Her
mhm,
parents were very attentive. They paid attention. They heard us. They celebrated us. My parents were just struggling and
mm,
they didn't get along. And there was a lot of yelling in the house and it was very chaotic. And so I sought out peace and calm and attention. And I had siblings who didn't even know that we had dysfunction and ended up
mhm.
repeating it in their relationships. And so, yeah, we have to figure it out at some point, hopefully, and do better. But also knowing what you don't want is helpful. Like knowing I knew I didn't want to have a household that was filled with yelling and dysfunction, and tried really hard not to have that in my house when the kids were growing up. Let's talk about what happens when people do say really hurtful things. Like, you say something, you immediately regret it, or maybe you don't even notice that you said something that was hurtful. Can people come back from those kinds of fights?
They can't come back from those fights, but they can come back. That's the repair process. And the repair process really has to do with taking responsibility. Let's say you said something really ugly or horrendous, and you even cringe when you think about it. And if you can apologize, and I cover this in the book too, if you can apologize in a really wholehearted, authentic way, not, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, and expect it to all go away, because if it was that hard, that won't do the trick. But if you really deeply show your regret for it and explain how you didn't mean it, but don't excuse it, saying something like, I'm sorry, I apologize for that. What do you want from me? Is not an apology.
No.
Or, or saying, well, I wouldn't have said that if you hadn't done this.
Yeah.
Again, that's not an apology. It's just because the word sorry is in the sentence doesn't make it an apology. But if you really heartfelt feel badly that you said it and that it hurt, yes, you can come back from it, because we all get to a place where we say, at one point, we say things we don't mean and we regret it and we know it as soon as it comes out of our mouth. But I think in these situations, the sooner that acknowledgement comes to play, the better it is, because otherwise it just festers in the air and so many other things, happen, get added onto it.
Yeah.
So yes, just because you had some horrific fight where you both said awful things doesn't mean you can't come back from it. It just means that you have to really get what you did and learn from it. Because a lot of people will really felt apology, but then they do the same thing the next week. It takes away the apology. Because
Yes.
it's not just really heartfelt apology, which is vital for the beginning, but you have to also improve. That's when
Yeah.
you have to say, walk away and said, I need an hour. I don't want to do that, but I feel it. You feel the adrenaline, you feel every awful thought in your head. So that's when you have to interrupt that, because
Mhm.
otherwise the apology doesn't mean anything if the same thing happens over and again. This is the situation where the person who's being apologized to doesn't want to be right. They don't want to be right in calling out your behavior. They want the behavior to change. That
Mhm.
there's no better apology after the verbal apology than to change course. That's the true apology. Can you come back from that with those things on board? Yes.
Yeah. Some people have a harder time forgiving.
But what they do with their anger, you have no control over. And that's the other part that you have to accept for yourself
Mhm.
is, I did what I could to repair it,
Right.
but I can't repair it alone.
No, we take care of our side of the street, as they say,
Yeah,
and do the best we
exactly.
can.
Exactly.
So we have a lot of difficult people out there who are extremely argumentative, my way or the highway. I have a client who has a lot of people at work like this, where they are just really difficult to work with. And I've encouraged her to vet her clients better so that she can have people who she can work with easier, because they just want everything to be their way. They don't accept the fact that something is on order and it can't come in on time. It's all her fault. And then she starts feeling bad that it's her fault, but she knows better. Even though she knows better, she still will go there. And she'll get defensive, I'm trying the best I can. And it's this cycle of, this person is very combative, and the other person used to be a massive people pleaser, so she has a hard time dealing with it. So what do we do with these people who are just so combative, my way or the highway?
I mean, you have choices. It's different in a business situation, obviously, than it's in a personal relationship. In a business situation, whether you own the business or not, you can decide, I don't want to do business with the person because it feels somewhat aggressive and abusive, and you can make that choice. Or you could also say, this person, they pay on time, they're a good client on other ways. I am going to learn how not to personalize it or defend myself. And I'm going to learn not to personalize what isn't personal. This person is obviously frustrated and probably have, in many ways, good reason to be frustrated, even though it's not your fault or your doing. You have to depersonalize it yourself and just know that person's just blowing off steam. And unfortunately, you're the one in front of them. So you have a couple choices there. One takes a lot more emotional work on your end. The other one, you just say to yourself, it's not worth, if you can't do that, it's not worth it. Or I'll only give that person a few minutes to vent and put a boundary there and just say, I am working on this. I will get back to you when I can, and not let them give them that space to dump on you also.
Yeah, we worked with another client that she has that was doing the same thing. And she was ready to quit. And she told the client, she had her bottom line, and she just said, this is really not a pleasant work environment for me. And unless these things are met, we can't continue. And they were so regretful and wanted to continue with her. And they've really changed how they behave towards her. And so I think a lot of times,
like calling a bully a bully.
Yeah, yeah. And, these people are the same with other people too. I mean, this other woman who she deals with, her kids don't want to hang out with her. It's not just about this person. It's absolutely not personal. And it's hard to not take things personally when somebody's coming at you. But I think what you said also, not to get defensive, is so important, because that just fuels the combativeness, right?
Right, because you're also feeding into it when you get, instead of saying, I'm sorry it's turning out this way, or it's unfortunate that this happened, you're acknowledging their frustration. And I understand you're frustrated because of this, but if you get defensive, that just makes them angrier. So, the question is always, what is your role in this? What part are you playing? If you're defensive, you're keeping it alive. You're adding to the aggression that's coming back at you.
So if you were in a partnership and this happened, would you handle it any differently?
In a partnership, I would hope you're not in a partnership, you're not afraid of losing business, but you're afraid of maybe losing a relationship. There's other value to it, just like in a business relationship. But if it feels abusive, if the person doesn't hear you when you say, I don't work with my way or the highway. If there's one or two things that you feel that way, that you feel strongly about, I want to hear about them and I want to know why. But if unilaterally across the board, it always has to be your way, that doesn't work for me. In a relationship, I need both of us to have our opinions count and our desires wanted, just like the friend who didn't want to just go on the same date and said so, nothing happened. In that situation, I would say, I saw this in the paper the other day, the show is coming into town, I'd like to do it. If they still just said, no, I want to do this, then you have your answer. But you also want to give them, sometimes you need to give somebody space to make a different decision too, because they're so used to, people who do my way or the highway are more fearful than bullies even. they're afraid of change or they feel vulnerable. There's a lot behind it. And most of us are not going to bother to take the time to figure that out. But sometimes when you ask somebody, what are you afraid of by trying this? Is there something about this that is tell me why you're so opposed to this idea? So then you have a conversation about it as opposed to just like, oh, screw that. I'd like, before you say screw that, I'd want to know what you're screwing that about.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think people don't even always know what they're afraid of, but I think
No,
that it's definitely a reaction
but
to,
it can open a conversation.
I like that, opening the conversation instead of feeling shut down, feeling both people feel shut down when one person is aggressive and the other person freezes, nobody gets anywhere. So just trying to keep your cool and center yourself so that you can have that conversation.
That goes back
So,
to being curious.
yeah, exactly. Such an important thing, which we've come to the end of this conversation, even though this is such a rich conversation. It could go on forever, obviously, because this is such an important topic. But I'm going to ask you what I ask everyone, which is what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
Pay attention to how you're feeling. It's very easy to say you bring all your baggage with you. Maybe only bring, like something for the overhead bin. You're a product of your experiences and they form you. You're also able to be in the here and now and see who you are now and what you need and how it feels and notice what your body's telling you. And notice when you're saying, oh, that's not so bad, I don't mind that, or that's okay. Notice when you compromise. We're always analyzing everybody else, but take a step back and say, how did I feel being in this with this person? Is there something else I want to know? Or do I move on? Because I don't want to waste time trying to make something work. I want something that works or could work.
I like that. I think we're so other focused, and so much of our upbringing has been about being chosen and being qualified and being pretty enough and smart enough and had going to the right schools and owning a home and all these accomplishments that you achieve. And it's really about how does this work for me and my body? Like the body does not lie. And every time, like one of my clients was saying today, she was getting these like hair on the neck, standing up when she was with this last person. But then she would just say, maybe I'm being too sensitive or whatever. That's what we do often, is dismiss that strong intuitive feeling that something feels off, and then we don't discuss it and we don't bring it up. So knowing how to have these conversations, knowing how from early on not to, even on a date when somebody's talking too much, just these are all opportunities to know, first of all, to practice asserting yourself and being authentic, but also knowing how a person is going to respond to that kind of conversation.
Don't wait for the red flags.
Yellow flags can turn into red flags. They could also turn into green flags if you find out more. So yeah, get curious, as you say, get curious. Lisa, tell us how people can find you.
My book, What Are We Really Fighting About? How to Transform Conflicts into Conversations. It's now being sold on Amazon. I also have a website, lisabrateman.com, if somebody wants to communicate me there. And my books are listed on my website as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing this important information. It's really life-saving to know how to fight fair and how to know what you're fighting about, because most of the time it is absolutely not what we think it is. And once we can get to that deeper level, we can talk, and we can do it with so much more kindness.
And it's fun.
Actually. Yeah, you get closer when you have the right type of conversations, not avoiding them, but having them.
Yes.
So,
thanks for inviting me again on your show.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating on Apple Podcasts, share it with your friends, your family, everybody. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.